note that this session is part of the Bulletin Dove panels by World YWCA. And by joining this session, everyone who will have the opportunity to speak consents to their image and audio being broadcast. By participating in the panel, you have agreed to behave professionally, respectfully, and be culturally sensitive towards other people to promote principles of respect, diversity, and inclusion, as well as to actively prevent and not engage in any abusive behavior of any kind that leads to any harm, prejudice, discrimination, or harassment against any person. We encourage viewers to adhere to the principles and be respectful to everyone and sensitive to their cultural realities, experiences, and expression. We recognize that freedom of expression for anyone is important, but we emphasize the principles to treat everyone with dignity and respect at all times. If you do not adhere to these principles, kindly note that you will be removed from the panel, as World YWCA does not accept any abusive behavior of any kind. And without further announcements, it is with great pleasure that I now give the floor to World YWCA General Secretary, Casey Harden. Casey, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Danny. Welcome to everyone that's joined the panel on this platform and also on Facebook. Really want to set the stage and the frame why World YWCA has created this panel series on peace with justice. Peace with justice has been a constant vision and goal throughout more than 160 years of the YWCA being a movement of women leaders all around the globe working collectively and in their own region. And since 1855, though, and also YWCA leaders together have passed more than 40 resolutions about women, peace, and security. If you go back, it's a constancy, it's a thread. And the reason is that we know that while women don't start wars, they, in many ways, and most often, if not always, most often feel the ill effects of war and are most in conflict and are most impacted. In 2021, as we do our Peace with Justice work, we stand with and are committed to UN Resolution 1325 and also orient our work towards Sustainable Development Goal 16, which calls for just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. We, as I said, we know as a global movement through all of the years of our existence that women don't start the wars, but again, they suffer the worst consequences. So this conversation is one that the YWCA has never been able to put behind it ourselves, but we hope in the future we will be able to. But the fact is we can't now, and that's why we bring these witness accounts today and in other panels, in order to really generate movement that is beyond compassion, beyond empathy, beyond knowledge, but actually moving toward action. We also know that the active participation of women and young women is really required to have relevant action and effective implementation of peace processes. We know empirically, we knew it anecdotally, but nowadays we know empirically that women are vital and required to building peace that's not just inclusive and effective, but also is sustainable and long-lasting and moves towards stability. And then with COVID-19, it's highlighted that while the global pandemic absolutely has affected every person indiscriminately, there's an increasing intensity and complexity of armed conflicts and occupation, ethnic violence, military oppression, terrorism, and fragile governance. And that continues, and even more so, has a unique, devastating, and long-lasting impact on women, families, and communities. So YWCA leaders in your unique context all over the world constantly mobilize on issues of peace, conflict resolution, and anti-violence, alongside and really inseparable from the critical leadership, advocacy, and community response work that we do. So today in this first edition of the Bullet and Dove panels, we'll hear context, stories, and realities on the ground from Palestine, Armenia, and Japan, and also a bit about peace building and advocacy efforts. We very specifically also will talk about these resolutions that are passed by the World YWCA, they're passed by other international NGOs, they're passed by church communities, they're passed by more loose movements that exist when they adopt principles or assumptions about how they do their work. And the question is, how do we really take advantage of those resolutions and have them play a really integral part in peace-building efforts? And what concrete actions can be taken by those not in a community in order to support a community? With that, I want to thank Ashkan, Sayaka, and Tammy for being speakers today with the World YWCA. And thank you, gracias and merci to Marina and Francis for your interpretation efforts. And lastly, thank you to Mira Rizik, World YWCA Board President, who will share closing words with us at the end of the panel. It's a real pleasure to introduce Arda, our moderator. She has been a strong root of the YWCA movement for a long time. She's a communications specialist, and for years she's worked to articulate issues of identity, gender, culture, language, ethnicity, women and human rights, and overall mindfulness and wellness. And she's worked to share that knowledge with other networks that focus on these issues through writing, film, digital interactive forms, and today through her moderation. So thank you, Arda.
Thank you so much for that. And it's exciting to be starting this first edition of Bullet and Dove. So here we are in the year 2021, after more than a year of social isolation and reflection, we are reminded once again that we are in this movement together. Perhaps one of the most crucial messages of the pandemic is how valuable are human connections and meaningful friendships. Indeed, for those who find themselves in situations of discrimination, racism, conflict, violence, and war, perhaps the most difficult yet important question to be asked in such times is the question, are you okay? Oftentimes, the reality on the ground is too overwhelming. And sadly, I happen to know several Armenians as well as Palestinians who for tens of years would do anything to avoid answering this question, are you okay? Opening up their wounds will be too much for them to bear. Having this in mind and looking at our speakers from Armenia and Palestine, I know their own personal journeys were deeply influenced by war. And at the same time, I'm also excited that we have with us from the YWCA of Japan, Sayaka Higuchi, who has been working on programs that have to do with peace building and nuclear-free world in the YWCA of Japan. She's been at the program peace education program since 2007. And she has strong interest in peace education as it is the topic she enjoys researching at her college and master course. So we are happy to have Sayaka with us today, who says that she's attempting to teach a culture of peace to students through teaching war history and structural violence, such as inequality or discrimination. And Sayaka has also majored in sociology of education, and she's working as a Japanese language teacher at the international school in Tokyo, Japan. Maybe you can teach us a word or two, Sayaka. We also have Ashken. Ashken Aslikyan is a young woman leader, activist of the YWCA of Armenia. She has actually more than 7 years of experience working with civil society and research through data collection and training. She herself is fluent in Armenian, English, and Russian. She has a bachelor's degree from the Yerevan State University. Also, she's passionate about advocacy and human rights. She focuses on gender equality and its linkages with peace and security, and is a firm believer in realizing what human rights would look like and what the core elements and principles are to be applied for all human beings, as they must be respected, protected, and upheld globally. Last but not least, I'm kind of passionate about introducing because I happen to know these individuals and I can say so much more, but we'll try to keep it short. Tami Rafidi, another member of society that is quite well known in Palestine. She was born and raised in Palestine, political and human rights activist with a long path in working for women's rights. She has a BA in English language and a master's degree in international studies from Birzeit University. She also got a Fulbright scholarship where she completed her PhD in conflict analysis and resolution. One side note here, I remember speaking with Tami. She mentioned when she went to study in the States, one of the things that was unfamiliar for her at the time, I recall she said that it was kind of weird for her to not be hearing bullets from where she is, to not be hearing the sound of war. Tami is currently a founding member of the National Democratic Assembly of Palestine. And this is a body that brings people together through democratic mechanisms that work towards a free Palestine based on the rule of law and institutional governance. And she's over the years been actively engaged in workshops, seminars in Palestine, as well as abroad. And she was also recently nominated to run the Palestinian Legislative Council elections of 2021. That almost seems like a lifetime ago, even though it's the same year. So many events have been happening. So let me open the stage and hear from the speakers, starting with Tami. If you could set the stage for the situation from your perspective, because I know that you have interesting insight. And I will also follow up this question to Ashkhen and Sayaka as well, to tell us about the ground reality in terms of peace and security right now. What are the latest events and what is it that the citizens are witnessing at the moment? Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here because I have 4 minutes or 3, I think, to describe the Palestinian situation. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict is very difficult because it's a long process since 1948 of ethnic cleansing, forced displacement and dispossession, and violence and full force occupation. But I'm going to focus on the recent escalation of violence, which is very important and actually reflects the core of the conflict, which is Jerusalem. So I will start with that. During the holy month of Ramadan, the Israeli occupation put up barriers in East Jerusalem to stop the evening gatherings at the walled old city's Damascus Gate to, quote unquote, maintain order. And at the same time, eviction notices have been given to 13 families in Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood located between the east and the west of Jerusalem and north of the Damascus Gate and the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem. At the same time, there was a severe, brutal attack on worshippers inside Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this resulted in nightly protests in Jerusalem Old City, refusing the enforced Israeli measures, and a sit-in or a couple of sit-ins every night at Sheikh Jarrah to fight the repeated episode of expulsion, dispossession, and settler colonialism. People used to come from different areas of Jerusalem and occupied Palestine in 1948 to Sheikh Jarrah every night, and also from the West Bank who are able to enter Jerusalem to participate in this fight against settler colonialism, which is major in our cause. At the same time, this was very important for many people because Al-Aqsa Mosque has a political and religious significance among the Muslim world, and actually it's one of the holiest sites in the world. Israel, of course, kept a closed eye on what was mentioned. Hamas, it's very complicated. Hamas saw an opportunity in that, specifically after the cancellation of the elections. Hamas at some point needed to regain their legitimacy, keep their authority in Gaza, and at the same time be a partner in the Palestinian Authority and the PLO. When elections were canceled for obvious reasons for the Palestinians, and under the justification of not able to to vote in East Jerusalem, the Palestinian Authority and leadership decided to cancel the elections. At this point, Hamas had no choice. So they, as usual, promoted themselves as being the protectors of Jerusalem and projecting themselves as the face of resistance. They needed to protect their legitimacy at some point, and such legitimacy largely rests on their resistance credentials. From the Israeli side, Netanyahu was in trouble, political trouble. He couldn't form a government and wanted to save himself from corruption cases that are filed against him. So he wanted something to really save him from what has been done. So since Hamas always feels obligated to demonstrate its capacity to confront perceived Israeli aggression, they actually had one rocket attack on Jerusalem, and they demanded the Israeli withdrawal from Jerusalem Old City, the reversal of laws concerning the expulsion of families in Sheikh Jarrah, guarantee the freedom of worship in Jerusalem, and stop using force against peaceful protesters. Honestly, at this point, as a Palestinian, and seeing all the damage that Israel is actually violating all the human rights and the international legitimacy, and keeping a closed eye on the aforementioned, the Palestinian people felt that the resistance represents us in many different ways. Since the Palestinian leadership has been silent and nothing has been said, it was important to show that we Palestinians need to resist in order to call for basic human rights, stop the aggression, stop the occupation. It's just even the freedom of worship in the holy sites. An attack and aggression was held on Gaza. It was very brutal. Many civilians were killed. It resulted in 243 martyrs, of which 66 are children, 33 are women, and 17 elderly. And we were talking about a full force aggression with exaggerated use of force, bombing skyscrapers, shelling, killing people, the loss of pain, the pain of loss, I mean. And at the same time, there were like 1,948 injured, of which are 610 are children and 398 are women. So we're not talking here about a confrontation between two militaries, but actually an aggression that was held on innocent civilians in Gaza, which proved that Jerusalem is the core conflict of the whole Palestinian issue. Without solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict according to international legitimacy and UN resolutions, and respecting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and international humanitarian law, this conflict will continue, and it will escalate and de-escalate, and no resolution will be found, not in the near future and not in the future in general. So this is basically the summary of the latest situation.
Yes, Tammy, and it's interesting how you raised this. It's as if what happens the day after, as people are counting the numbers of the losses, and what happens the day after in terms of the political agenda, which takes me to Armenia, because we know that there have been elections and so on. So it's like the war is over. People are still trying to count how many people were lost, and there was even news about the corpses not still being found. So Ashkhan, if you could give us, an idea about the latest events as we speak.
Thank you.
Unmute, please.
Okay. Thank you, Arda, for the introduction, and well, thank you, YWCA team, for the initiative and for having me as a host. Yes, I will try to briefly introduce the current situation in Armenia. Well, in general, for those who do not know, Armenia is a very small country located in a very interesting landscape in between Asia and Europe. It is one of the earliest Christian civilizations in the world. However, even before that, Armenia had a very vast and rich history, and I'm sure you'll find much more interesting facts and stories about Armenia other than that. So last year in September, a sudden war started between Armenia and its neighboring country, Azerbaijan. And the war lasted for 44 days. And well, one can imagine how difficult it was for a country that has a population of 2.5 million and had just gone through revolution and having COVID on the top of all of that. So it was rough. Eventually, after 44 days, a ceasefire agreement was signed between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia as a guarantor of this agreement. In 2 words, the agreement stated that Armenia is giving away the 7 regions of Artsakh that Azerbaijan was claiming ownership for, even though these territories historically belong to Armenia, but we will not go deep into history today. So people in this area, they had to leave their homes, their land, and had to be replaced. This was kind of very shocking for us because on one hand, the war was ended and our brothers, fathers, and friends were not going to be killed on the battlefield. However, on the other hand, all this fighting and losses during these 44 days were kind of in vain, I would say, because the territories that we were fighting for were gone. But the agreement was signed anyways. We have a saying in Armenia that it states that the appetite grows while eating. So even after the agreement and ceasefire, Azerbaijan never stopped their aggressive politics and claims against Armenia, and now they want to obtain more and more territories of Armenia. Also, let me emphasize here that the same ceasefire stated that Azerbaijan is willing to give back all the war captives that they are holding, but until now they have returned around 40 captives, but they are still holding many more other captives that are being tortured and undergone different war crimes. As I don't have much time, this is the current situation in Armenia, which is not a very happy situation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashken. Sayaka, let's just also hear from you briefly about the reality in terms of peace and security. Also, having heard these perspectives, what is your insight from your point of view in Japan and from the YWCA of Japan?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for giving me this chance to talk about how YWCA of Japan work for peace building. Yeah, as you see, Japan is in a very different situation from other 2 countries because we are not in a wartime. But we believe that work actions for peace building is essential as a member of the YWCA of Japan. And today I want to introduce what we are doing at YWCA of Japan for peace building. We believe that women are the most disadvantaged in a wartime. That is why we believe that is very important for us as women to work on an issue of peace. And for more than 70 years since the end of World War II, YWCA of Japan has been making big efforts to protect peace by expressing no to the move towards war made by powers that be. As the first country to have experienced nuclear weapon in a wartime, I believe we have a responsibility to tell the facts of how nuclear weapons can create disastrous consequences. Currently, I am a member of Committee on Peace and on Nuclear-Free World in YWCA of Japan, where I organize peace education programs and advocate for the elimination of nuclear weapons, including nuclear power, from the world. In particular, we are now working to get Japan to ratify a treaty on a prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is known as TPNW. As you can see from the history of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, nuclear weapons threaten human life. In particular, effects on health of women are significant, and more than the actual physical effects, such as anxiety about childbirth, the psychological and social effects have disadvantaged women more than men in marriage and other matters. The children and grandchildren of hibakusha, which means survivor from atomic bomb, have also been affected by this. I believe that we as women have a responsibility to raise our voice on nuclear issues, as we are closer to people who are in a more vulnerable position. It is also a fact that Japan's war history has been very humiliating to women in countries and regions that were colonized by Japan. I believe that it is necessary for the people of Japan today to face the history seriously. One of the programs that the YWCA of Japan has been working for many years, around 50 years, is called Pilgrimage to Hiroshima. In this program, we also learned about the history of Japan's aggregation during the wartime. In the 1980s, YWCA of Japan learned about the issue of wartime sexual slavery, what is called sexual slavery during wartime, by the Japanese military in Korea and other countries where Japan occupied. And a member of YWCA of Japan at the time appealed to the media, big mass media and politicians to make an appeal to the world and make it bigger news. And finally, we, the YWCA of Japan, would like to stand in solidarity with those who are in conflict in other countries in the world. Especially, we would like to stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine and do what we can do together. Again, as a woman, we see the issue of peace as a matter of life and are working on it. We would like to continue our actions while getting involved with various people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sayaka, Ashken, and Tammy. Indeed, I just saw a comment that it's hard to summarize the catastrophes in such a short period of time. That is true. And at the same time, as you mentioned, Sayaka, it's this idea of interconnectedness. You know, for us, this might seem like what happened in Japan was a long time ago, but hearing from you, the anxiety still remains. And we also see that the YWCA of Japan, for instance, is still working on getting the message out and appealing to the world. And speaking of the world, this reminds me of what world and what media. So that's, I guess, the question to Ashken when it comes to the media and how the situation is portrayed. From your perspective, do you feel like the situation has changed? And when it comes to the subject of resolutions and working towards peacemaking, what can we make of the ceasefire resolution that we heard of between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Has it worked, and where do you see it now?
Thank you for the question, Arda, and thank you for bringing forward the media aspect, because it's very important. During war and even after that, as I was talking to my international friends, I I realized that, in fact, the people out there, they don't really know what is happening on the ground. And even the ones that were aware, the picture they had was quite different. So at some point, they were telling me stories at some point, and I was questioning myself, like, are we even talking about the same thing or no? In the 21st century, we all know that the war is double-sided. So we have war on the battlefield and we have war on social media. Right away, I knew that we are not going to win the second war on social media because we don't have the resources, both human and financial, to change the situation. I will just bring an example, and it's really funny because one of my friends from, I think she was from Europe, she was asking me during the war, is it true that Armenia is hiring terrorists to fight for them? And I was so shocked, and the situation was so difficult at the time that my response was, I wish, because we couldn't afford that, in fact. Well, we all know that 2020 was a very terrific year for the whole world. And as we were getting used to living with COVID and getting used to new conditions, the war started. Currently, people in Armenia are getting back to their everyday life as they once had before. But however, many things have changed. The war ended and the COVID is now more or less controllable, but the damages, the effects that these two disasters, the war and COVID, affected is still remains. And I'm not here talking about the economical damages, economical situation, but the psychological damage is even bigger, and it is even harder to overcome than the economical one. Yeah, and especially the situation among young people is very scary now, the mental health and other issues that they are having. And as we are talking about the ceasefire, let me emphasize here that we all realize in Armenia, and also I think in Palestine as well, people understand this, that the ceasefire agreement is just a piece of paper, and it is never followed. We have an example of another ceasefire agreement which was signed again between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 1990s, which again was never followed. I myself am from a borderline village, and hearing gunshots was a part of my everyday life. And when we would have people coming visit us, we would just tell them that, oh, this is just a firework, it's fine. But it's not fine. Of course, it's not fine. I guess the war that we recently had was a bit different than the ones we had before, maybe because we were all somehow involved in it through social media. That is why it felt different. And however, we are still hopeful that things will have better turn in the future as we still continue living, working and studying. And here a big stress on study, because education is very important. Yeah, in the country that we all love so much. Thank you.
Yeah, Ashkhan, when you said the ceasefire agreement is just a piece of paper, I saw Tammy nodding her head and agreeing. And Tammy already mentioned that the resolution for us Palestinians, these resolutions, I don't want to say that we are cynical totally, but I guess kind of cynical. So Tammy, the question is, if there is this cynicism about international agreements and resolutions and so on, what do you think the international community should do to meaningfully contribute for a free Palestine? And you're on mute.
It's interesting how conflicts are very similar when it comes to the international community and their intervention in conflicts, and how unfortunately power plays a role in more than justice. And I'm so glad that we do have solidarity movements and people working for justice and advocating for that, because it's not actually what's happening in the world because of the weakness of the international institutions and the international community. But there's always hope with the people. And this is great, seeing people around the world go out in solidarity campaigns of the Palestinian people and actually getting it back into focus, because it's one of the oldest occupations in the world. And actually it's never ending, where a lot of peace agreements were signed and major Israeli violations has been done since forever, actually, not only from the start of the peace process. So basically for us, the goal for Palestine is the state of Palestine and its independence by virtue of the natural and historic rights of the Palestinian people, by virtue of the international legitimacy and the partition plan, and by virtue of the recognition of world countries of the state of Palestine since it was declared in 1988. So we are talking about a state that exists. We are struggling not for the establishment of the state, but rather for the achievement of national independence and the exercise of full sovereignty on this land for Palestinians, including the right of return for refugees who were displaced and expelled from their countries, and now they live in refugee camps in neighboring countries, compensation, restitution, and recovering private property. According to the UN, there are many lands that are owned privately by Palestinians, and they still hold their ownership documents for those lands. Palestinians can, by law, prove their ownership of the land and claim them back. So probably it would be smart if we recommend to the Palestinian leadership to actually focus on that and work on raising the awareness of the people that actually they can claim their private lands in 1948 occupied Palestine. What the international community is requested to do, or what we call upon them, take real and concrete measures to stop the Israeli violations of UN resolutions, signed agreements, and to abide by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the international humanitarian law, because aggression and the killing of innocent civilians and the forced displacement of people is considered war crimes, and silence is accomplice. Silence is not something that is favorable, because actually it is a real accomplice with the more powerful. We are fed up by the American monopoly of the peace process. And at this point, we should, the international community is requested to form an international leverage for a negotiated settlement. And they should follow the steps of the Irish Parliament, which I have to mention here. They issued a motion condemning Israel's de facto annexation. And this is historic for using the issue of de facto annexation of land, which is settler colonialism, where Israelis are annexing land without just because they can. And this is what we are calling for. And for the BDS movements, we are now, we thank, of course, the BDS movement, and but we are now beyond the issue of labeling settlement products. We have to boycott Israel in general and work on more of what the Irish Parliament did and go beyond to actually fight the settler colonialism that really threatens the existence of the state of Palestine. And the international community should pressure Israel to accept holding elections in East Jerusalem, despite the fact that my personal opinion is that as Palestinians and the signed agreements, if we want to hold elections in East Jerusalem, we can without even wanting or calling for Israel's acceptance. But at the same time, just the international community and we've been watching the United States and Europe, they actually kept a blind eye for the issue of canceling the elections. So it's important that they need to push the PA for the regularity of elections, strengthening the democratic conditions of the system and reinforcing the issues of freedom and affirming the independence of the judiciary. Now, okay, as Palestinians, we do have a homework here, but at the same time, rather than funding, for instance, the security apparatus that is actually serving Israel at some point, we need to put all our efforts into the issue of democracy and citizenship and equality and social justice.
Yes, and what I hear from you, Tammy, it's as if there's this thin line between taking matters in our own hands versus turning a blind eye versus working with.
Yes, the thing is, okay, how can the international...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would really like to also hear from Sayaka, who is from a country that is not at war right now, but the leaders from the movement has been advocating for peace. And I just wanted to just hear the point of view of Sayaka about how important do you see resolutions like United Nations Security Council, Resolution 1325, 2250 in changing the situation on the ground. So from your experience at the YWCA of Japan, what do you think are the key strengths that people on the ground in and outside a country have to showcase when it pertains to countries of conflict?
I'm sorry, I don't have a good example, the relationship between resolution and like peace building actions in Japan. But I think I can raise the example how grassroots movement leads to more like bigger movement. Yeah, this is what the movement which I mentioned in past today, about the issue of war slavery during wartime. Yeah, we found that the fact that there were war slavery by Japanese military at the time of World War II. We found that fact through the program of YWCA of Japan. And so members at the time started doing the activity program for advocacy on a grassroots level. And they worked for media, mass media, or like politicians. And now it became a big news, and it changed it moved government. Is it answer to you?
Yes, in terms of the advocacy work. Yes, thank you, Sayaka. So from what I hear so far, I guess, and also from having spoken with you individually, I guess the point that it comes back to again and again is the one of raising awareness. So it's from the individual level of the countries as well as from the collective level. Before I close, I just want to hear maybe an affirmation from Ashken and Tammy, if you see it that way, that if you are to say like one word for the international community, or one can say it in one sentence, what can we as a movement, for instance, at the World YWCA do in terms of bringing about change? What would that sentence be? Or to push for these efforts of solidarity? If you are to summarize it in one word, one sentence, how would you say it, Ashken and Tammy?
I would go that we need to ensure justice, and we need to save people from the horrors of wars and conflicts. And honestly, we need to pressure governments around the world and be active people in calling everyone to stop any wars that actually kills people and traumatizes them forever. So it's about justice, ensuring peace and security. And this is what actually the YWCA around the world is working for. But probably we need more visibility, or I don't know. It's
I will just add on what Tammy just said, that we have a very powerful weapon, and it is media. So for my point of view, we need to raise the awareness and also to break the chain of silence so that the war crimes are punished.
Yes, yes, you're right. And it's, this is somehow getting connected together. Also having heard from Sayaka and the anxiety, what Casey said earlier, also how women suffer the most consequences during the war. To summarize this session, there's a lot that can be said. And I know that Tammy and Ashkan, also you mentioned some details that are maybe not easy to explain because there's the political and then there's the reality and there's a lot of it to be said. But to summarize, I would just say that this, to go back to my introduction about this question, are you okay? It just makes me it fills me with a lot of energy to see that this perseverance, I would say, from Armenia and also from Palestine is something that is not to be underestimated. The perseverance of the people on the ground, regardless of the resolutions that are being implemented or not. It's like the image of the two kids in Gaza that we saw, upon their house being completely demolished and destroyed, they quickly stepped in and they found that the fish in the house is still alive in a jar full of water, and they're excited about that. Or another image that I have in mind is when we as the YWCA movement called Ashken during the war on Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and she was so devastated and in a shocking reality. And yet, after some tears and shared messages, we still laughed about how she's not the greatest cook in the world and how she can still boil some water and to show off her skills and so on. I think that these simple messages, these little moments amidst the brutal and overwhelming surroundings, open the space for hope, gratitude, and ongoing solidarity, sisterhood, and friendships, as we saw from the pandemic and elsewhere. So on that note, I would just thank you once again. There's so much more that I would like to hear. I feel like it's, political experts / notes from the ground that we're hearing from you. Thank you so much, Ashken, Sayaka, and Tammy for your notes. Before we close, I would also open the space for Mira Rizik, the World YWCA president, to perhaps make a final note at the end of this session, which I really hope that these panels will continue, Bullet and Dove. It's the space to connect together and hear the shared stories. So thank you again. And Mira, if you could have the final words, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Arda. First of all, thank you for all the panelists. I think you were hoping, Arda, that it will continue. Yes, I mean, the idea is that the peace and justice work at the World YWCA is not new, as Casey has explained. So there are tons of resolutions that have been taken over so many years. And the unfortunate thing is, despite all that, conflicts, wars, aggressions, occupations continue, which tells us that our work cannot end. Our work should not stop. On the contrary, I think we have more to do as a global movement of women. And one of the most important things that we can do is actually uncover, if you want, the truth. And the importance of that is uncover the truth from the women's perspective, because the gender perspective of conflict and war is very different. The media usually does not take into consideration or does not even reflect, does not even talk much to women, does not even reflect how conflict or war is impacting women. This becomes the role and responsibility of organizations like ours to expose that. Going back to the UN frameworks and UN resolutions, there are so many resolutions that offer women that platform and the right actually to be engaged, to be politically engaged, to participate in peace building and to do that. And this is what we're doing. These panels hopefully will continue. And I think the most important thing for us as a movement, and I want everyone to understand, is that the objective behind these panels is not just only to expose the truth, as I said, but also to build young women's leadership and women's leadership in peace building. And this is critical for us. This is one of our strategic objectives as a world movement. I think the more is also to expand and build solidarity networks globally. We hope that as we go, more and more people from outside the YWCAs and other partners and other women organizations, human rights organizations, will be pulled into these panels so that we can work together. This collective power is very important. Also the important thing, for all these panels is that they are meant also for action. We hope that as we go further, we can find grounds for common action, whether it is, calling or, issuing action statements, calling for certain actions. This has been the norm at the YWCA. This is not new. We've issued so many statements around so many issues. And hopefully what we will do in the future panels, more countries that are living today under conflict or in war will be pulled in. We have so many countries. I'm a Palestinian and I feel like, wow, our problem is big, but let's look around the world. Can you tell me how many countries are living in peace? Very few, if any, because peace is not lack of war, by the way. They are living in conflict. There is so much struggle, internal conflict. There is so much power structures that are abusing people. This is also conflict. This is unfair. And I want to remind all of us of our strategic goal as a world YWCA movement, that our goal actually is to empower women to change these power structures that produce injustice. So we cannot be silent. We cannot be silent, and we should not be silenced. This is our role as women and as a women's movement, to put on the table the voices of women, to put on the table our demands, and to put on the table the truth, because any action starts with understanding the truth, exposing the realities. And here we are today with 3 wonderful panelists who started to expose their realities. It will take days and days for you all to expose these realities, because I know the problems are very complex. And we are sorry that it's only 1 hour, that we're giving you such a short time to expose all that. But we hope, as I said, this would not be the end. I think more importantly is, I agree with all of you and what you've said. We can do more. We can build, more solidarity. We can advocate. And I just want to give one example. In the past, I remember the YWCA of Palestine has organized and hosted many witness visits for people to come from the movement and come and see in their own eyes. I think this is important. If we just start thinking about what we can do, there is a lot we can do. There is a lot we can do. I know sometimes, we don't have the resources, there are limitations, but, there are things we can do as a movement. And I'm hoping that as we go, our commitment to peace and justice would be explored further. The global movement would see the potential for working together for peace and justice, because if we think that our problem is only ours as a country, Japan, Armenia, Tokyo, or wherever, no, it's global. The same global structures are producing the same global conflicts and wars. The more we can be united, the more we can work together, the more we can put that collective power of women together, I think the better off we are in terms of promoting peace and justice. This is my message to you as president, to not only the panelists and the people who are with us today, but for the whole global movement. I genuinely believe women can make a change. Women can change power structures. I know it's going to take us a lot of time, but it starts with all of us. It starts with you. It starts with the young women, offering them spaces to make their voices heard. And I'm hoping that as we allow, more and more women to become aware of this injustice, to become aware of what is producing this injustice, to become aware of how the colonial powers are manipulating all countries across the globe, I think then we will probably see more potential for working together. I think I will end with that. I really thank you again and thank the staff and Casey and everyone who have worked on making this a reality. I'm very excited personally as president to continue with these panels. We have a long way to go. We have many countries, and the more we can expose, I think, the more we can be hopeful. I end my word by saying, despite everything, and this is always the end of anything I do, keep hope alive. We cannot lose hope. Despite everything, despite war, conflict, despite the injustice, we can never, and we will never, as women, and we should never allow us as women to lose hope. So I end this by saying, let's go out of this panel with a lot of hope, with a lot of energy, and with commitment to collective power to continue to build peace and justice. Thank you very much for all of you.